yes, the Russia-Ukraine war is hopefully little by little but coming to a possible end, thankfully to negotiations between Trump team and Putin team. Of course, we shall see how it really goes, but there are indications that it really might finally wrap up all of this killing and suffering. So, as we're getting closer to the positive end, I wanted to also talk about one of the biggest scams that West was promoting about the Russia-Ukraine war. In my opinion, this biggest scam was concerning the root causes of this war. And why I think it is important? It's because this topic that I will be discussing with you here today I think is one of the main contributor, one of the main factor that was fueling the fire of the war and was making a lot of average folks, maybe most of the Western people, to basically unconditionally and irrationally support the prolonging of this war. Of course, people, when they were supporting this, when they were supporting keeping on giving money and weapons to Ukraine, I'm sure they were not thinking about like, yeah, we want just more soldiers to die from both sides. They were thinking about that we are doing this because we hate Putin, we hate this current Russia state. But by the fact what they were doing, of course, they were indirectly killing more and more Ukrainians and Russians as well, but as I understand they don't care that much about the Russian side. I'm especially pointing out the Ukrainian part. So when some people saying that by this support they support Ukraine, I'm saying not. They supported the war, not Ukraine. Ukraine lost in all of this war. Ukraine were losing economically, and what is the most important, they were losing people. So, according to the very popular narrative that were promoted by the Western media during a lot of years, the war started because basically, well, I will be exaggerating, of course, but it started because Putin woke up one day, and as he is an inherently evil, horrible dictator person, he decided like, oh, I want to do something even more evil. I see this weaker country close to my border, and why not to invade it? Why not to start a war that might put at risk my own economy, that might put at risk my own reputation, because if we start losing, well, I will have problems that will kill a lot of my own people. Why not to start it? I mean, I'm an evil guy, so yeah, that's what evil guys are doing. Let's go against the good democracy, because I hate democracy. Something like this. And to be honest, I understand why West was promoting this kind of narrative about the causes. The thing is, it's much more easy to manipulate the people's minds and to align the public opinion with your own aims if you construct the narrative in a very simple way that would clearly divide white from black and good from the bad, and picture things in a very primitive, simple way that even the kid with 4 years old would understand. Like, those are the bad guys, evil guys, and those are the good guys, absolute kindness and freedom and all of this kind of stuff. So when you portray it this way, I mean, of course, most of people who don't have a particular interest in politics, for example, or who are highly ideologically aligned with the current power, like for example with Democrats that was before, it's easy to align them with your aims because everyone wants to support the good guys, everyone hates the bad guys, so, well, you win the public opinion. And, of course, it would be not in your interest, if you want to keep the war going and, for example, to weaken Russia, it wouldn't be in your interest to promote more complex context of the war about NATO and other things that I will be discussing later. This simplistic white and black, good and bad, is the perfect way. So that's why, if you remember, a couple of years ago, Putin was often portrayed in Western media as a really crazy, evil guy who just want to, I don't know, having these ideas of conquer the Europe and things like that. So let's talk about the reasons why this narrative that says that Putin started the war just because he likes to conquer different countries, why this narrative doesn't stand the critics. Well, first of all, there is literally zero factual evidence that would support the claim that Putin just wants to expand the borders of the country and to create the Russian Empire that would include Baltics and, I don't know, more of the Europe, because basically Putin never said that. It was never implied that Russia has the intentions to conquer more territories, to conquer Europe after the Ukraine. On the contrary, Putin was saying that there is absolutely no hostility from him toward the European countries. And by fact, I think, if I don't remember wrongly, he started his political career by doing very shady corruption schemes with Europe, by the way. So in his initial years of being president already, he really liked doing business with the West. And he was getting richer and richer personally, and a lot of his friends, well, you might dig into very loud corruption cases. And he built up all of these very cozy, corrupted schemes for his inner circle of friends. So he was living perfectly. He liked doing business with the USA, with Europe. He was perfectly fine with this. The problem started when his desire for the friendship with the West started to meet kind of coldness from the West. If you remember, I'm not sure if any of you heard, but I think it's quite a known fact right now that he even wanted to join NATO. He asked one of the USA presidents, I don't remember whom exactly, like, what about this possibility? And well, of course, it didn't happen. And NATO, on the contrary, started to expand its borders closer and closer to Russia. At first, Putin was saying something very lightly, like, hey, that's not really cool, I don't really like it. But also he didn't want to spoil the relationship which he had with the West, which were great. Until finally, this expansion reached kind of red lines in his mind that West claimed, like, Russia doesn't have red lines. Yes, it has, and it had. And when certain lines were crossed, well, the rhetoric from Putin started to shift. Another thing that is making it quite weird to talk about that Putin wanted to conquer Europe, that's why he started with Ukraine, is because if you think rationally, Putin doesn't have means to conquer the Europe. All of these NATO countries, some of them have nuclear power. So if you think rationally, Why? Why would he want or try to do this suicidal mission? One thing is to try to secure borders with the West, taking control, at least political control, over the country, which is by mentality is basically like Russia, because you don't think that Ukraine is very different, right? I mean, I've been living in Ukraine for a lot of time. It's pretty much the same kind of people. So it's one thing to take the control over something that you consider is kind of yours and your sphere of the influence, and another entering to the Western world to have a possible conflict with NATO, things like that. So implying that he has this as an aim, it's quite irrational. To be fair, the minority in the West really were trying to spread another alternative viewpoint of the root causes of the Ukraine and Russia war. And basically they were saying that the main cause why Putin invaded Ukraine is the potential NATO expansion and inclusion of the Ukraine into NATO, because it was announced on a very high official levels from both Ukraine side and from the Western leaders that, well, this is about to happen. And that what served as a final red line for Putin, and he started such a brutal aggression. And I tend to agree with this viewpoint. I think that was finally the main incentive for him to start this. Not that this justifies in any way all of the horrors. I really would prefer so much better that all of this stuff would had resolved in a diplomatic way much before all of this escalation started. But we have what we have, and the reasons are like that. And why do I think so? First of all, because we have some real factual evidence that supports this point of view. Unlike the evidence that supports the point of view that just Putin likes conquer countries. In the case with NATO, we know, and we have video evidences a lot, that from the early 2000s, he started, and in general Russian officials started to warn the West, at first in a very soft form, not to expand. They shown their dissatisfaction with the military alliance from the ex-enemies, now again enemies I guess, expanding and getting closer and closer to your borders. And well, these kind of soft warnings, just like, hey guys, maybe not, we are not really happy, well, let's keep on being friends because we are friends, right? Let's keep on doing business. At some point it converted to more strict rhetoric when the red line were crossed, first red lines. And this turning point probably was 2008, I think, when Putin made this speech in Munich, basically announcing that he will not tolerate this kind of behavior from the NATO alliance in the future. But anyway, I want you to see this very short clip from Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He's much more knowledgeable and expert in the matter. He will explain it much better than me, and I already shown this in some of my other videos, so check it.
To 1990, when President Gorbachev, who I had the honor to help support as an economic advisor to his economic team, unilaterally disbanded the Warsaw Pact military alliance of the Soviet Union. Unilaterally. And when he did it, he received solemn assurances by Germany and the United States that NATO would not fill the vacuum with US-led military bases and alliances. And the United States lied. Not for the first time, by the way. Because as soon as the military alliance of the Soviet Union was disbanded, the neoconservatives in the United States, that is the military-industrial complex and its supporters, began to plot the eastward movement of NATO. And this started already in 1992. And then in the mid-1990s, after President Clinton had told further lies to President Yeltsin, who I also had the honor to help advise, NATO began its enlargement. First to 3 Central European countries, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, which became Czech Republic. In 2004, NATO expanded to 7 more countries, including the Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, and Slovakia. And then in 2008, George Bush Jr. insisted that NATO would move to Ukraine and to Georgia. And President Putin at the time and in the year before had made absolutely clear that is the ultimate red line for us. And it was in this context also we should recall that the United States had unilaterally abandoned the ABM treaty and started placing missiles in Eastern Europe. And so in 2008, President Putin already told Bush that this was leading to conflict and that Russia would take Crimea if the U.S. persisted in its move. Then please understand that in 2010, 11, 12, 13, Ukraine tried to walk a delicate balancing act between the United States pressures and Russia. President Yanukovych called for neutrality, which is what he understood rightly to be necessary to save Ukraine from the disaster that it's in right now. The United States could not abide by neutrality. And so the United States contributed to the violent overthrow of Yanukovych in February 2014. We say it's the Maidan revolution, the spontaneous uprising, but the United States at the most senior levels was involved in that, quote, spontaneous uprising, including the then Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland. So this war started, by the way, February 2014, not February 2022. It's a lie that it started February 2022. It started with the overthrow of a government trying to maintain neutrality. And the United States helped put in power extreme nationalists in Ukraine who broke the neutrality policy, demanded NATO membership as soon as possible, and welcomed billions of dollars of arms shipments from the United States starting in 2014. So this war, going into its 9th year, came from a direct collision between 2 nuclear superpowers. How stupid is this? I can't even use polite language because the people in the United States government that have provoked this, these neoconservatives who have been in power for more than 30 years, are putting the entire world in danger.
Some of the critics in the West of this perspective, according to which the main cause for the war was the expanding of the NATO into Ukraine, they say that that couldn't be the cause of the war because NATO, in fact, already was at the border of Russia. So if Russia tolerated NATO on their borders, why would suddenly they don't tolerate Ukraine on their borders? It's a valid point, why not? I accept this argument, but I have some things to say as an answer to those. First of all, yes, it's true that Russia was tolerating NATO in its borders, but Putin was not happy about it. You shouldn't confuse tolerating and welcoming or being like cool with this. No, as I mentioned before, Russia always was at first very softly giving warnings to the West, like, we don't like this, don't push it, stop, 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 until this kind of expansion reached the red line. So, assuming that if there was no red lines before, that there will not be red lines ever again in the future, it's a logical fallacy. Another thing is that, let's be clear, these NATO countries that are close to Russian borders, let's be honest, militarily, they are a joke in comparison with Ukraine. Like what? Baltic states are a serious threat by themselves, like Lithuania or Latvia or Finland? Like, you are not being serious about this, right? So Russia didn't feel threatened by them. It's one point. And second point is that these countries, despite they joined NATO, it was basically joining the alliance for their own protection, to feel safer. It's because they are mentally and economically were fully with the West, and being in the NATO protected them from Russia invading and taking political control over it. But they never claimed that they are planning to have nukes in their countries. It's like technically they can because they are in NATO, but they don't yet. And I assure you, if or when they decide like, yeah, okay, let's move the nukes here close to the border with Russia, Russia wouldn't care about NATO or not NATO. It just wouldn't allow this to happen. That's why they didn't do it. Maybe they would want, but USA was smart enough not to do this, because we would have another Caribbean crisis, and who knows what would happen. Like USA didn't allow in 60s to Soviet Union put nukes in Cuba, Russia wouldn't allow this to do with Lithuania or Latvia or any other of these small countries. So these factors, like being a joke militarily, not putting nukes, it's kind of softening factors which Ukraine didn't have. It was openly talking about the desire to get back the nukes that they supposedly had when they were part of a Soviet Union. I know some other people say that it was always Moscow who controlled the nukes, so they were placed, but Ukraine couldn't really launch them without the permission. So, well, it's debatable. I'm not sure about the specifics, but Ukraine really wanted to get nukes. It was absolutely honest about it. And of course, the military potential of Ukraine, manpower-wise, and also they had a lot of weapons in the early stages of the conflict. It's uncomparable with, I don't know, Lithuanian military potential. So there are quite noticeable differences. And the last point that I want to mention, and this point is, in my opinion, probably is the main factor why Ukraine really became the red line and not Poland or Lithuania, is because Ukraine, mentality-wise, it's basically the same as Russia. So it's practically same Russian people, despite whatever you might hear right now, how different they are, they want to do anything with us. But I've been living in Ukraine before, and before all of these conflicts, like maybe 15 years ago, most of people in Ukraine, they were speaking Russian. They, sorry, they were thinking as Russians. It's the same kind of patriarchal mentality. All of it the same. Indeed, when I was a kid, I didn't even know that those are two different countries, because I didn't notice the difference when I was crossing the borders, except the western part of Ukraine, which was always quite different even from most of the center and the east of Ukraine. So even the Central Ukrainians, they often didn't understand the language of the Western Ukrainians, because it's like kind of a mix between Ukrainian and Polish, or Russian and Polish. I don't know, it depends how you think of it. So when you have a country with which had more than 40 million people that are basically Russians, almost like Russians, and when these 40 million people, you as a Putin, for example, a leader of Russia, you seeing that these 40 million people are about to get under the full control of the West, militarily, politically, economically, well, because Russia had a lot of businesses, a lot of oligarchs from Russia got rich because they had businesses with Ukrainian oligarchs, so everything was nice. But you see this huge bunch of people, they are about to become Western-minded, and the NATO's alliance, of course, is whatever you say, but it's quite anti-Russian. It was always anti-Russian, right? What do you think how the mind of these people would be manipulated? They would create a big anti-Russia of 40 million of Russian people, basically. And you being Putin or another president of Russia, you would think like, I feel that the fire under my ass is getting hotter, because the potential for the regime change operations against Russia, it's really huge if you use the human capital of Ukraine in comparison with using your Western influence in Latvia, Poland. It doesn't matter. They really cannot do much to manipulate the public opinion in Russia. But 40 millions of Ukrainians who are practically Russians, who speak the same language, you can really infiltrate a lot of people into Russia from Ukraine to fire up protests. You can try to promote unhappiness and unsatisfaction feelings with the government using Ukrainians if they become very anti-Russian. And well, indeed, West already was trying to do things like that. So Ukraine being fully under the West was also becoming a huge threat to Putin personally, to his regime, right? So a part of the nuclear argument that Ukraine really was very active and bravery about this and saying yeah, we want to develop our military, we want nukes, we want all of this kind of stuff. They also would be a great tool to start little by little making these operations that a lot of Western special agencies were dreaming about, of dismantling the regime, taking over the Russian resources for their own corporation. And by the way, I'm not even saying if that would be worse for average Russian folks, because I have no idea. For me, all of the capitalist system is just quite exploiting the normal folks. Putin regime is an oligarch regime, especially before. Right now he has to cut on the corruption just because the war is expensive. But before, well, I mean, he was using basically the richness of earth of Russia to make a very little percentage of people rich. But with the West, it's kind of the same. They would take the resources to make their own corporation, their own oligarchs rich. So it's a kind of a war between two capitalistic representatives. So this threat from the Ukraine was real, and it might have become dangerous for Putin power. So it summed up to everything else, and the decision was clear for him that I have to start the war. Now, some of you in some of my videos have asked what side I'm supporting. And because, yes, of course, people needs you to be on one side or another. This kind of dichotomic thinking that most of us have. Again, nothing personal, is just how our psyche works. And I have to disappoint each one of you probably, because I don't support any side here. If you think that I support Putin, you are wrong. If you think that I support Zelensky, of course you are wrong. Why? Well, basically, about Putin. I was always and still am politically in opposition to his way of doing things. I have absolutely no illusions about his honesty or about his care, deep care for people's well-being. Maybe there is some of it. I cannot know, but I know he did a lot of shit. And also, he is a typical capitalist. He created a system of oligarchy in my country. I'm absolutely not a fan of that. I'm more of a fan of Marxist ideas, so you can call me a communist bitch, I guess, that would be fair. And about Zelensky, how can I support him, come on? Do you think he is a more democratic leader? Well, check my video where I shown you how his regime is catching innocent guys who are screaming and crying off the streets, putting them into the buses, and after a couple of weeks, maybe a month if they are lucky, send them to die into the trenches. You tell me if this is democracy or freedom. And about the corruption, right now it seems like in Ukraine it's even higher than in Russia. So obviously I don't support Zelensky as well. What I support are the normal people, the majority of people who don't want to fight, who don't want the war, who don't want to keep on destroying their country and to keep on suffering. Most of people just want to live normally. So basically I am a rational person, or at least I'm trying to be. I know the basic math, I can evaluate the resource potential of one side, of another, and I can see that this war never had a prospect of Ukraine to win. Unless, as I mentioned in my other videos, that the NATO would really join and get into the direct conflict with Russia, and we would have World War III, which would very quickly escalate to the nuclear shit show. And I don't want that. And the last point that I want to add, that if some of you, I hope not many of my viewers indeed, but if some of you are keeping supporting, sending weapons to Ukraine, keeping sponsoring this war and making it last longer, what you are doing is supporting more Ukrainians to die. You support catching innocent boys from the street and sending them to get probably their body mutilated in the best case. Or just a quick death if they are lucky. That's what you are supporting. So if you are not ready to get your soft ass off your couch, take the gun yourself and go and defend Ukraine in trenches and risk your own life, you better shut the fuck up.